Hey, this is a wonderful conference. It's particularly interesting because the other infrastructure conferences and dialogues I've seen recently, everybody sits there and they say, where are we going to get the federal money? And the actual thinking seems to be postponed until we can figure out where the federal dollars are coming from. Ms. Marks presented a pretty interesting picture of the kind of infrastructure system we're going to need: smart infrastructure, advanced infrastructure, cutting-edge infrastructure. And it's pretty clear to me, and it should be pretty clear to all of us here, is the federal money is not there to fund much of any of that. And if the money were there, the expertise would not be. So I think we have to realize that if we're going to get where we need to be, we're going to have to do a good bit of that on our own. And if we can just get the federal government to be a cooperator, we will be able to get somewhere in that direction. I've got here to speak today 3 projects. I think they're very interesting. They're not purely regulatory issues. I think the interesting thing about these projects is that they are all projects that are performing a public purpose, but they are doing those public purposes without very much federal assistance, monetary assistance. If there have been the federal roles may be more of a problem than an aid, learning how to cope with that federal system and get into a cooperative mode is something they're all thinking about. I'm told that I need to call up first and early John Creighton, who is a port commissioner of the Port of Seattle, because you have to leave early, John. John's an elected official from King County, Washington. He's unique in that his port commission operates both an airport and a seaport, and involves all of those different kind of regulatory and financing and all that kind of situation. And I'm just going to turn it over to him and let him talk to you about his experience with the government and things he might like to change, and things that are working.
All right, well, thank you, Gordon, and thank you for having me first. Even though SeaTac Airport is growing its services, there's only a limited number of flights still from DC to Seattle, so I have to catch one a little bit later. But I spoke about the specifics of the $3.2 billion in projects going on at SeaTac Airport, the fastest growing large airport in the country, 3 years running, in the breakout session, so I don't really want to dwell on that. And then when I was asked, okay, what federal regulatory issues are you having, I was sort of thinking about it. And we have, our regulatory issues, frankly, are more at the state and the local level. When you have a city that every time you want to build out a new port terminal, they say, how about funding this waterfront park? Or when you have a state that has stormwater runoff regulations that are the strictest in the country, and there's not even the technology to meet those stormwater regulations, our problems are frankly more local. But at the federal level, what I would like to talk about are federal user fees. And I'd like to contrast the federal user fees that we use at the airport versus what we use at the seaport. The airport, I feel, works relatively well because it's more localized. The seaport doesn't work well for us because it's a federal one-size-fits-all policy. But the income stream that we use to fund a lot of airport projects is what's called the passenger facility charge. And on every flight out of Seattle and then every leg after wherever that flight ends up, we're allowed to assess a fee that's up to $4.50 per leg. And that's capped. It's been capped for 15 years by the federal government. It's collected by the airlines, but it's really passed through to the airport to fund airport infrastructure projects. And so, to me, it's a classic user fee. The users of the airport are paying this fee that goes to building out infrastructure. And if you think about it, the airports that have more users going through them have more needs. And so it generates more income as more users use the airport. So it's worked relatively well for us. The issue is that, in my 12 years on the Board of Commissioners, we've grown from 29 million passengers a year, the 23rd busiest airport in the country, to now we're the 9th busiest airport in the country with 45 million passengers last year. And we have huge huge project needs. So we're doing a new international arrivals hall, newly expanded North Satellite that's dedicated to Alaska, new center runway, new baggage belt system, new hard stand waiting room area, and all those projects add up to $3.2 billion, and that's the Commission approved all those projects in 2016. Now, those projects basically use up the passenger facility charge stream completely until 2035, and still partially until 2047. So we have very few other ways to look at how we fund airport projects. And so we've been advocating for some time for the federal government to raise that cap on what we can charge. And of course, the airlines don't like it. They feel it's a tax on tickets. But then where are you going to go? Are you going to, if you tax the general public, not everyone uses the airport. I think it's elegant as a user fee. And then you look at our seaport, the harbor maintenance tax is a federal tax on every container that comes through a U.S. seaport. It's based on the value of what's in the container, but it averages out to about $110 per container. Seattle and Tacoma, we're beautiful, natural, deep-water ports. We don't have any dredging needs. And the money from that harbor maintenance tax is directed towards dredging. So, about $1.8 billion gets collected federally every year. $900 million of that actually goes into the general fund, not helping ports at all. The other $900 million goes to other ports, because since we don't have any projects that fit under the bill, we only really use, I think the figure is 1 penny out of every dollar our shippers have to pay into the tax fund. But at the same time, we've approved in the last couple of years over $400 million in seaport projects, to make our terminals big ship ready, for the big 20,000 TEU mega ships that are coming online. We could really use that money to help build out seaport infrastructure. And so, it's something that's we had this debate statewide in terms of a gas tax. Well, tolls. The truckers were okay with paying tolls as long as they were assured that the toll money went to improving that corridor. But usually government has no self-control, and so they'll use the toll money on all sorts of other things. With the harbor maintenance tax, we feel, well, our shippers have to pay for it. They're getting no benefit, so the Canadian ports of Vancouver and Prince Rupert are talking to our shippers saying, hey, come through Canada because you don't have to pay this tax. So it's not only not benefiting us, but it's putting us at a competitive disadvantage, we feel. And the Trump administration has shown a willingness to break eggs. And so we're hoping that we can make some headway on figuring out a better seaport-related user fee. Thank you.
So you've got really kind of the worst of both worlds. I mean, you have to operate basically as a private entity, but what you can charge is limited.
Exactly.
And you're subject to a tax that doesn't yield any benefit.
And we're benefited as a locality. Ports are strange entities in Washington State. They're independent governments with elected boards. We have taxing authority, so 1.5% of the King County taxes that homeowners pay goes to our port, so that equals $72 million a year of an income stream to the port that we use for mainly seaport projects. But on the other hand, we have taxpayers locally in our county saying, well, why are we paying all this money into the port when you should be using user fees and whatnot.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so there's one instance of a public facility not getting much federal funds, but impeded a little bit. And you're leaving. We'll see you later. Thank you very much. Okay, well, the order of the rest of it is going to be ladies before gentlemen.
Oh,
Is that all right?
that's fine.
And Courtney
Degner.
Degner
Yes, nice.
is
German
the leader of the port of the Cadiz Valley Water Conservation Project, which is an extremely innovative project in California.
name. Oh, I do have a presentation. Is that, I can use it up there?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, great, okay. I will go up there then.
All right.
All right.
And she's going to talk about, this is a project with essentially a public function, but I understand privately financed.
Yes, it is privately financed, but it has gone through 8 years of regulatory hurdles. So I think, and now our last stop is the federal government, so I think it's very applicable for this panel today.
Good.
Yeah, so I am here to talk about the Cadiz Water Conservation Recovery and Storage Project. It's a new water supply in California for 400,000 people. As you may have followed in the news, California is chronically water challenged. We've had historic drought, followed by a very wet year. And with this wet year, we're still not able to meet all needs in California: ag, environment, municipal, industrial. Cadiz has a land position, 45,000 acres of land in the eastern Mojave Desert. And we've been actively farming a majority of the property since 1983. And the property is located overlying a significant groundwater basin with 17 to 34 million acre feet of water in storage. It's about equivalent of Lake Mead. It's a very significant system. And there's natural recharge in the system that is being lost to evaporation every year at the base of the watershed. The picture there is some of our ag holdings at the base. Our hypothesis for developing a water project when we've been doing ag is that we could potentially capture and conserve some of the water that's being lost to evaporation and deliver a new supply into Southern California. The image here is showing that we would utilize an agricultural well field that we have, augment it with additional wells, and be able to deliver water via a pipeline that would be constructed within an active railroad right-of-way into Southern California. The project would, as I said, deliver water for 400,000 people, but it also has a carryover storage feature, which in a year like this, with the current hydrological conditions, we'd be able to offer a new storage facility in Southern California. The project, as designed, has no environmental impacts. That was a big, something that was very important to my management as we developed the project, that we were able to get through the regulatory hurdles by doing a safe and sustainable project. The project is a $250 million project in phase one. It includes the construction of the well field, the pipeline, the ancillary facilities, some treatment facilities, et cetera. And it would generate 3,000 jobs in the first phase. In the second phase, which would be some of the storage facilities, an additional 3,000. The $250 million would be privately financed. We've been working as a private company with the private markets to develop that debt financing, construction capital, and the public agencies would be participating in the project, purchasing the water, and also managing the facilities, but would not be on the hook to provide additional capital unless they could beat the construction financing terms. So we are able to provide all of the $250 million for construction finance. Some of the highlights of the project benefits, no public financing, new supply and storage, the jobs benefits. Part of our commitments to the local county when we were doing the permitting process was that we would contribute more than 50% of the jobs to the local Inland Empire, as well as 10% of jobs for veterans. And then we did our economic reporting is showing that we would have a nearly $1 billion economic benefit in the Inland Empire. This is a good map just to show on the infrastructure, thinking about the infrastructure. Our project and our land position is located very centrally to a lot of the water infrastructure development in California, but by building out the orange line there to the main Colorado River aqueduct, and then the green line up into which we own currently a idle natural gas pipeline that we would like to convert to convey water. By developing both of those systems and meeting up with our land position, we can connect into the main infrastructure system in California for water and be able to deliver and move water in both directions. It's something that the state has not been able to yet do. The main systems coming down from the north is the State Water Project, and then the Colorado River. Those are the two main imported supplies into California. Both of them are chronically short, or one is short and one's not. And so to be able to have a facility like ours that could import water from maybe the State Water Project, but then deliver water off the Colorado River Aqueduct, it's a major addition to the infrastructure system in Southern California. But doing anything in California takes a long time. The state has some of the strictest environmental regulations and permitting requirements. It's notorious for that. But we did develop a project that we thought could make it through that type of a rigorous environmental review. We did hydrological evaluations, we did well drilling, we had peer review, a public CEQA process, did the whole thing. And then we're promptly, after we received all of our approvals for the construction, we were sued by various environmental groups that typically challenge most environmental infrastructure projects in California. But through an extensive court review period, we did prevail against every claim. None of our documents were ever changed. There was no additional reviews ordered. And then that was then further brought to the Court of Appeal in California. Again, sustained. Our approvals have been upheld. We should be good to go. It's been 8 years. And now we get to the federal regulatory hurdle that we've had. The pipeline that I referred to earlier would be constructed within a railroad right-of-way. It's co-locating the water pipeline along this line. It avoided environmental impacts by having to construct a new corridor across open public land. It doesn't have any tortoise impacts. It was the preferred environmental alternative. However, in 2009, when we first started the state CEQA environmental review period, we were told by the federal government that co-locating within a railroad right-of-way was fine. BLM has jurisdiction because the railroad right-of-way does cross public land. We were told in 2009 by the Department of Interior there would be no federal review required and that we could proceed with our project plans. However, through the course of the previous administration, the goalpost was moved a few times. And by 2015, the Bureau of Land Management in California sent us a letter and said, we don't think you're within the scope of the right-of-way. You might be trespassing if you build your pipeline. You're going to need a federal environmental review, which I don't know how familiar everyone is with federal environmental review, but there's really it's unlike the CEQA process, which can be lengthy, there's no timelines, it's very political, and it was a very controversial decision, mainly because we would be similarly situated as many other infrastructure projects that have used railroad rights-of-way. We were going to further railroad purposes, provide benefits to the railroad, similar to the way telecommunications lines, electric lines, et cetera, contribute benefits to the host railroad. So there was a lot of controversy around that decision. We've been fighting it with a bipartisan delegation in Congress. And since the election of President Trump, who has a slightly different view of the way we should view infrastructure and the uses of federal lands, we have seen a little bit of relief so far. In March, they did pull some of the underlying guidance opinions for this railroad right-of-way use, and we're hopeful that they'll also pull the guidance opinion that came out on our project specifically. So if we can, it really is working on that issue right now. It's very current. It's an appropriations action. It's something that will go on at the administration level, but we are hopeful that we can get it resolved this year. And then in the end, we're moving over to construction and getting going. So if we can clear that federal hurdle, we'll be good to go.
And so what's the problem with the right-of-way?
So in 2009, like I said, we entered into a lease agreement with the railroad where we would further the law had stated if you are furthering a railroad purpose, you can utilize their right-of-way without having to get your own separate right-of-way. In 2011, under the Obama administration, the Interior solicitor put out an opinion that said, you don't need a permit so long as you further railroad purposes, which we did. We would be providing water for fire suppression. We'd be, part of our pipeline will generate electricity with hydropower turbines inserted into the pipeline. We were going to dedicate power to the railroad, for example. We went through this and provided this information to the BLM, and we were okay, but over time, they kept moving the goalposts about what could be a railroad purpose to where the letter came out in 2015 that said, unless we were a primary railroad project, we needed to get a new permit. And the controversy surrounding that was that there are many infrastructure projects already within railroad rights-of-way that do not primarily further a railroad purpose. So we've been joined by the railroads, other infrastructure development companies, very concerned with the lack of grandfathering in of some of their infrastructure development. So applying the precedent of our decision, they would need to go back and have everything reviewed and approved by the BLM. It's a huge bureaucratic nightmare to have the BLM look through thousands of miles of existing uses. And luckily, there was bipartisan reaction to that decision, so we've had bipartisan support in Congress to clarify the scope of railroad rights-of-way. But really, we were just trying to do the environmentally preferred alternative by co-locating within an existing corridor.
And is your opposition still active? Are they active at BLM?
The BLM is going through some changes now in the Trump administration. There have not been very many appointments yet, but I think the leadership from Interior is saying rightly that corridors or public land should have multiple uses.
But are the people that sued you still?
Well, yes. We were sued by the Center for Biological Diversity,
Okay.
And they're still very active.
Okay.
Not on the litigation front, but as a lot of these infrastructure
They're
projects face.
Whispering in the BLM's. Right.
I could guess, but I think that's part of the problem with a lot of these projects, or the hurdle, is that it is political and it's policy. It's not only.
And there's a threat of further litigation.
There can always be.
I'm sorry. Questions from the floor. Back here.
How do you keep the investors interested for so long?
Well, yeah, we've had a long-term investor base that the asset that we own, the Cadiz land and water assets with the agriculture is a very valuable, it's a valuable property. The water prices continue to rise in California. And I think we have done everything the right way and demonstrated to our shareholders that we can get the permits, that we've fought in court and we've won. And honestly, the BLM thing has been very controversial, and I think the policy will change for the right, hopefully.
Elizabeth, you had a question?
They're still counting on the return. They're not getting any real-time return now.
Correct. We do have agriculture on the site, and so we have a very minimal operation of agriculture.
Really investing in water.
True, but so if on the downside case, the land could be, our permits would allow us to use the same water for a full build out of agriculture, for example. So, and we're one of the only private entities in the area that could access the water supplies.
I just had a quick question.
Sure.
Just to clarify, your reusing, that pipeline has been there, and you are turning it around into a water pipeline now?
There's one that we would need to construct within
Okay.
the railroad right-of-way, and there is one that's a natural gas. It was formerly a natural gas asset and it's been idle, and we want to move
Okay,
water
but
in.
has that been in the right-of-way too? Is that a different project?
That's a different right-of-way. It is
Okay.
an existing
So
right-of-way.
this is this is
Yeah.
going to be, you're going to put new pipe down the railroad right-of-way?
Correct.
To transport the water?
Yeah.
Okay.
So our properties are the yellow kind of clumps of land, and then we would be, the railroad right-of-way is that orange line down to the blue aqueduct.
Okay, and whose right-of-way is that?
The Arizona and California Railroad, which is a short line of Genesee and Wyoming.
Okay. Are they being,
Helpful? Yes, very.
okay, good.
No, I think the railroad industry is concerned about this. There are thousands of miles of railroad rights-of-way in the West that co-locate infrastructure.
And you lease from them, right?
Yes. And
So they're very helpful, so that they would like to get that lease.
yes, it's a form of revenue for railroads, additional way
yeah.
to profit in their real estate.
I know about that pretty
Real
much
estate.
from Texas. Thank you.
Okay. And there are instances, you said Texas, yeah, there's the same problems there.
With all your legal delayed and also been sued and even you win, and how much money you lost from beginning of the feasibility study, or maybe, what's the final return for the investors?
We still expect to get a single-digit rate of return consistent with what water, the benefit for our shareholders has been that the water prices have continued to escalate. Ever since we started this development, water prices have gone steadily up at 6% at least. And so when we first were looking at contracts for water could be sold at $200 an acre foot. And today it's well over $1,000 an acre foot. So there's still a significant cost and benefit there. But yeah, I mean, if you didn't have the regulatory hurdles and we could have been online years ago, there would have been a significant benefit to California. This year, for example, we've had years of drought, and if the project would have been operational, we could have been delivering water already, and we could have also this year been able to import and store water for future dry years. So, there's a significant challenge when you have to face 8 to 10 to 12 years of regulatory hurdles to get a project online. All right,
Any more?
thanks.
All right, thank you very much. Next, we have Darrell Johnson, who's with the Orange County Transportation Authority. He's got a road improvement project, mostly privately funded.
Locally funded.
Yeah, locally funded. So, apparently some small federal share, and it's carrying some heavy load with it.
Yes.
All right.
All right, thanks. Well, it's always nice to fly 2,500 miles and learn about the water project right in your backyard. So I noticed I'm a consumer of the Santa Margarita Water
Yes,
District, so
you
maybe I'll
would
give them
be
a call and see what they can do.
beneficiary of the
So,
water. Yep.
There's a lot of things I could talk about on this project, but I'm going to try to hone it in on some of the regulatory challenges or federal challenges we're having. But I thought I'd just give you a quick picture of what we are. If you don't know Southern California, Orange County is home to 3.2 million people. That makes us the 5th largest county by population in the entire United States, 3rd largest in California, and we're larger than 20 states. We sort of fit right in between, slightly bigger than Iowa and slightly smaller than the state of Connecticut. And with that comes huge infrastructure challenges. And we're a special district in Orange County just to focus on transportation infrastructure, the highway system, toll system, the bus system, the rail system, taxi cab administration, a couple of other fun things. And our sort of annual capital expenditure is in the neighborhood of about $1.3 billion. Our 10-year program now is about $6.2 billion, mostly locally funded. And I'm going to come back and forth on that a few times. Not the most exciting map here, but this is the project. It's 16 miles. couple things I'll say about it is if I were to zoom out this map just a little bit and showed you Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, San Bernardino counties, you would have a population base of about 20 million people in a state of 38 million. And when you look at the traffic on that blue segment, that is the project area, on the north end of the corridor, it's about 370,000 average daily vehicles. Our projections are over 400,000 average daily vehicles over the next 20 years. That statistic alone makes it the single busiest section of interstate highway in the United States. And we did not make any improvements in it over the last 20 years, save for some safety improvements, paving, and an HOV lane put in 1989. Because you can also see from this map that the street network is on a nice grid, and the highway crosses at a skew. So any type of widening requires the replacement of at least 18 bridges, which makes it a little cumbersome, a little complicated, and a little bit expensive. But as we moved forward with a local sales tax measure in 2006, this was a major component of that. And I'll talk about the financing in a little bit more detail in just a moment, but our sales tax measure set aside $1.2 billion to improve the corridor. Some of the basic purposes of it, I wish I could say this was an abnormal picture on an abnormal day. The only abnormal part of it is that this is looking northbound, that the southbound somehow seems to be free-flowing, so I'm not sure what happened over there. But that is not normally the case. It's bidirectional traffic to job centers in the Irvine area, and then also going north into Long Beach and Los Angeles. Real quick, where we are on the project. In October of 2013, we sponsored legislation to use the design-build method of procurement for the project. We've had some experience doing that on another project in our county, but that in California, we like to do sort of innovative things, and then we put a limit on how long you can do it and when it's going to end. So that had sunsetted, and we sought new legislation without a sunset with broad statewide authority that allowed us to use the design-build method of procurement. So that was done. Would point out we are fully environmentally cleared, and we have no lawsuits from the environmental community, which is a pretty nice thing to have. 2 cities have sued us, but that's sort of a side note. But one of the reasons we didn't have any lawsuits from the environmental community harkens back to what Congressman Graves was saying when he was here a little earlier, which is upfront environmental mitigation. So we have entered into a $300 million 30-year plan to set aside open space in our county, water quality program, and long-term mitigation. So we have entered into that plan. It's taken a number of years to develop, and we've acquired over 1,200 acres of open space, and we've committed a non-wasting endowment to keep those properties well-maintained, open, and managed over time. And not only did we not get a lawsuit of any type from the environmental community, they wrote us letters of support. So I think that the congressman's on to something at the federal level. We think it's a model. Recently passed legislation in California allows that to happen at the state level. We'd love to see something like that at the federal level as well. Also, we changed the law to allow us to have the ability to toll the facility. That was in October of 2015. And within a year from that point, we've executed our toll operating agreement with the state of California, and we've awarded a design-build contract to a joint venture called OC405 Partners. And on January 30th of this year, with my $3 pen, I executed a $1.3 billion design-build contract. So it's probably over there. It's a cheap blue pen. And it's pretty exciting to do this, right? We moved along. It's 10 years of planning, 250 public meetings, $50 million doing the preliminary design and environmental clearance. A lot of excitement. In California, you either love tolling or you hate it. There is no middle ground. So 50% of our residents are excited. The other 50% are pretty upset. But we're moving along pretty well. Real quickly, this color coding here, the yellow is we're adding a general purpose lane in each direction on the outside of the highway. And the green in the middle will become the new express lanes. And that bridge section there is sort of typical, where the bridge covers the highway at a skew. So every one of those bridges, there's 18 of them, will be demolished and rebuilt to accommodate that footprint. It makes it a little bit complicated and a little bit costly. Rebuilds the local street network, has active transportation features in it, et cetera. This is the reason we do it, though, right? This is very simply clock faces on the left-hand side. Our forecast, we might be wrong, we might be right, but our forecast says that in 2040, if we didn't do anything, it would take 133 minutes, that's a little over 2 hours to go 16 miles. in the regular lanes, and the huge benefit of the HOV lanes would be you would save 10 minutes, so it would only take you 121 minutes in the high occupancy vehicle lane. But if you add the project that we've proposed and cleared, you see that to the right, where in the regular lanes that is reduced to 29 minutes, half an hour, 16 miles, so you're still a little sluggish, but with the express lane choice, we see a guaranteed trip of about 13 minutes end-to-end over that corridor. We're pretty confident in that. We've owned and operated the 91 express lanes for the last 13 years. We have a really good understanding managerially and financially about congestion pricing and how to manage the facility. So we're pretty confident that we can deliver those promises on the express lanes. But I want to come to the financing, and I hope that this is interesting, and I hope maybe this is where your questions will be. So I'll start at the bottom. The $1.9 billion is our fully loaded project cost. That's exclusive of cost of financing. This is just the cost of the project. And I'll start with the top. We have a local sales tax program that we have committed through ordinance and through resolutions of our board of directors, $1.137 billion. We have about $400 million of that in cash, pay as you go, sitting in an account, ready to spend. And we plan to have 2 debt issuances, one in 2019 and one in 2021, to achieve the project cash flows. I'm going to skip over the TIFIA loan for just a moment. We have worked very hard to get the state of California to come up with a $89 million contribution. It's 5% of the project cost. And for the luxury of that, we get to pay them $59 million to provide oversight on the project. So you guys are smart. You can do the math on that, right? So there's not a lot of state financing or state funding. And then we move to the traditional federal funds, which is about 2.5% of the project cost. That essentially helped us pay for the environmental document through, under the old days, the state surface transportation program of about $45 million. So we're left with a third of the project cost, $627 million. And we looked at accessing private capital markets like we had done when we purchased our 91 express lanes and we refinanced the 91 express lanes, and how we issue our Measure M debt. And we also looked at a TIFIA loan. And there's clearly benefit to a TIFIA loan. It obviously has a nice low interest rate. And one of its major benefits are that there are some, I would say, patient payback parameters. And the interest that's capitalized during the 5.5 years of construction does not accrue in the same way, or doesn't accrue at all in the TIFIA loan. But at the same time, it's a very lengthy process. And we started with our letter of interest, or letter of intent, in February of 2015, with a goal of closing that loan by March 31st of this year, 13 months. And we have not yet closed the loan. And while I recognize, and we recognize fully, there's been a change in administration and staffing, we still think even at the outset, 13 months is a pretty long time to go through a loan process. And I'll give you a little bit about the finances of OCTA. All of our funding sources that we have in the bank, I said we had $400 million for this project in the bank. We actually have close to $1.5 billion in cash on hand. We could self-fund the project internally. We could borrow from the bus program. We could borrow from the Streets and Roads program, pay ourselves back interest. We could access the capital market. Our sales tax measure bonds are rated AA+ by S&P and Fitch, and AA2 by Moody's. We have great credit ratings, and we have the ability to do that. But we think this is a good facility. TIFIA is a good way to go. We are now looking at a May 31st close date. But to take a term that was just used by the person that spoke before me, the goalpost moves a little bit. And every time that goalpost moves, you have uncertainty. And that uncertainty leads to project delivery concerns, project delivery challenges. Cost is always an issue, escalation cost. Earlier this week, I met with the executive over the design-build joint venture and assured them that they should keep working, and when they submit a bill, I will pay them. We do feel confident that we will get the loan closed by TIFIA, but we do think that there are many, many opportunities to strengthen that process. And one of those, it's easy to sort of, I don't say complain, but observe of shortfalls. But I think that one of the shortfalls we see in the regulatory world is every entity is treated either the same or very similar. And I think much of what we're experiencing is the consideration that not every borrower has the same credit and the same risk and the same profile. And as a very, very strong borrower, we think that we should be able to get to a close quicker and have some less things put in front of us. Very confident we're going to get there, but it does continue to push back the closing and then ultimately the start of construction. And then the reason I do this work is because of quality of life for the residents in Orange County. And the fact that when you fund late, you start late, and you finish late. And I would like to get the project out to the consumers, the customers, the taxpayers that voted for it in 2006. It's already a long, tough road to get through the environmental clearance and the planning process. This really should be just pushing it over the goal line, and we believe we'll get there, but we want to get there as fast as we possibly can. And finally, I'll close on just a couple of next steps. We did issue a notice to proceed to the design build contractor in January. Notice to proceed number 2 was scheduled for May. On my notes on my sheet here, I have an asterisk next to that because I believe that is now at risk at this point. And when that is not given, there is contract escalation, which is appropriate when you enter into a contract, and that will be some cost to us. And then in August of this year, we plan to issue an RFP for a toll systems integrator procurement. Right now, that seems like we can hold on that schedule, and we would award that in the January timeframe. And then we would go into customer service center and back office procurement early next year. And then in 2019 and 2021, we would issue about $900 million in debt, sort of split evenly in 2019 and 2021. And then we would have a 5-year construction period from 2017 to 2023. And I'll close on that in 2023, that will mark the 20th year since the first study was done on the 405 corridor, which we did in 2003, so we could put it on the 2006 ballot to ask for it to get done. So I'm not sure if I should be happy or sad that it only took 20 years based upon some of the other stories that we hear in infrastructure. But if we're on schedule, it will be exactly 20 years to almost to the month that we did the first study to improve that corridor. So with that, I will close. I think that says I have 2 minutes left, so I'll stop right there, if that's all right, Gordon?
Sure.
All right.
And we'll take questions, and I'm sitting here thinking more and more about Courtney's horror show. And if anybody has any more questions about Courtney, for Courtney, I'm sure she'll address those too. Questions?
Just a little one, since OCTA already runs toll roads, I just don't understand the need, not the need, but just what's going on with why you have to procure more toll system integration and back office customer service. Don't you already have that for 91?
It's a great question, and two things. One is the toll systems integrator will integrate the toll system activities or software, et cetera, with the design build contractor. So we believe we need that regardless. I could go through a long discussion of how we're planning to procure the back office for the system. We plan to do a joint procurement for our 91 express lanes and the 405. We think around the 2019 timeframe, we will be in, sort of at the end of our useful life on the 91 express lanes. So our goal is to combine those so when we open in 2023, we would have a joint back office system. And I'm looking out there, I don't know who asked the question, I couldn't see where it came from. Yes.
So, and for my own information, I was just, the TIFIA loan that you've decided as part of your financing stack you're going to do, where are your elected officials in all this? And have they been collaborating with you on trying to move the needle, in a more timely fashion?
Yeah, it's a great question, and they are aware of our challenges, and we are, I would say, pursuing two paths. We're pursuing a very technical path with the Bureau staff and expressing our concern about timeliness and making sure that all of the documentation is in the proper order, et cetera. And at the same time, we are utilizing opportunities to have our local congressional delegation express concern about the timeliness, as well as the contacts that our own board of directors have. So,
So
it's a two-part
is
process.
that part, since this has been going on so long, is that something that you've just determined that you need to leverage those kind of relationships to try and move Department of Transportation or on that? Is this, have you all proceeded?
Well, I think it's important to acknowledge that the Bureau staff has a job to do, just like as a public agency staff person, I have a job to do. And we want to take that to the point where we could. And when it became time to maybe push from a different angle, a political angle, as you identified, we took it as far as we could with the Bureau staff. We're continuing to work with them, but we also wanted to let our local elected officials know that, this is real time and real money, and we needed to elevate and highlight that as appropriate.
This is such a common story, and I have a similar one on how we just, and trying to let these people do their job takes an awfully long time, because sometimes they just need a little nudge from their friends back home.
It does, and
Very frustrating.
it is frustrating, but at the same time, I think that collectively, the collective we constrain a lot of the public agency staff because we put rules and regulations in. We plan for the worst case scenario, not the best case scenario. So I don't hold any ill will towards any of the staff working on the loan in this case, or any other for that matter. But we do have a time frame that we want to meet, and under any circumstance, a year, I believe, is too long to do something that is pretty
I
straightforward.
mean, they've been given protocols and have had precedents set before this, and now you're trying to accommodate that and yet help them understand that, time is money, and this is the people's money too. So
Right.
at stake. Thanks.
Well, I think we have an opportunity to get Norman back on schedule, so if there's no more questions, we'll adjourn and go to the next one. Thanks
you,
very
Gordon.
much, both of you. Yeah,